I'm going to briefly talk about the PPP program. We know that as of last, I believe Monday, we had over 5,200 small businesses in West Virginia had been approved for loans to the tune of about over $1 billion. We know also, I've talked anecdotally to many lenders who have done hundreds of these, and they've met with great success. So simply, it's running out of money. It has run out of money as of yesterday. Remember, the program didn't even go live until April the 3rd. And so I'm very concerned about this. I support Senator McConnell's effort to put $250 billion into a plan that we know works, and we know it keeps that connection between the employee and the employer. It keeps our small businesses heads above water because of the forgivable nature of the loan. Remember, that is a part of it is an 8-week forgivable loan that can cover your payroll, your mortgage, your rent, and your utilities. And hopefully that's enough to keep a lot of small businesses going and a lot of people still on the payrolls. I'm very disappointed that this has gotten caught up in politics. To me, it's needless that we can go ahead while we're still teleworking here and not returning to Washington until May the 4th. We should be able to unanimously agree that more money into a very successful program for small businesses makes a whole lot of sense. So hopefully cooler heads will prevail. There are people that want to add things in and make tweaks, and they're asking, why can't we do this? Every time you add something in, make a tweak, you add regulations, you add guidance, you add time. We are just now getting to the point where our sole proprietors, say a hairdresser or somebody, is just now being able to access the program, and they're getting the door slammed in their face because of the political nature of the pushback. So yesterday, my days are kind of running together. Yesterday or maybe Wednesday, I was notified that the president asked me to be on his economic task force, and this is about getting back to work, opening up, and trying to figure out the best way to do this with the heavy weigh-in from the health professionals. And the president lined out a sort of a 3-phase approach, obviously in conjunction with a lot of what the governors think. But we had a phone call with the president and the vice president yesterday. This task force did, bipartisan task force, asking for us to weigh in on issues such as, what do we think? What are we seeing in our states? Testing has got to be front and center here. We need this antibody testing. We need more robust testing. And, it's frustrating that we haven't gotten all of the testing to diagnose. But what's really going to be, I think, useful to businesses and states and governors is going to be the antibody test, which would tell you whether you've developed an immunity and you've had this in your system, and you are probably, A, not communicable, and B, you're not going to catch it. So I think we're looking forward to that. The president expressed his great hope that will come sooner than later, and it will be a very simplified test rather than something that takes 10 to 12 days to find the answer to. So I think, overall, I think West Virginia's done a terrific job of social distancing, of taking care of our neighbors and our friends. I've heard from numerous businesses who have accessed the PPP loan and are very grateful for the help and think it will make the difference of laying people off and not. And I'm very excited about that. I also think that as West Virginians, we're anxious to get moving again and open up, and so I think gradually we're going to start looking at different ways under the guidance of the governor to be able to say certain segments or maybe counties. I don't know how he's going to want to do it, but to open up some of the maybe smaller businesses and that have smaller clienteles to be able to move forward. So I am very anxious also to make sure that our hospitals are getting the help that they need, because that's been a big issue for us around the state. I think there are a lot of people on there, maybe 65, 70 of us are on the whole committee, but it's well rounded around the state, and there's probably more Republicans than Democrats. I haven't actually made that accounting. Well, I think what we're seeing from our small businesses is, I think that there's been a lot of guidance that's come out from Treasury that say what actually is a payroll cost? Is that the payroll tax, the payroll, your retirement, your health care? And so delineating what that includes, I think, has helped small businesses, but also what's included in other expenses that might be part of the forgivable loan. But I think where the concern is more than anything is it's for an 8-week period of time, and would we consider looking at that program and maybe extending the length of time that you could apply for a loan? So I don't know, maybe another 4 weeks. Now, we haven't gotten there yet because this program, the date that it expires in terms of the final date would be June 30. So we're a little ways off from that to see what the real demand is and what people are wanting. But, I think that this has been a much more flexible lending program than any SBA loan has ever been. And the forgivable portion, of course, is unprecedented. So I think there's a willingness to be flexible, and I hope that small businesses will reach out to us and let us know where they need that flexibility. Well, I think what could be damaging even more than what we've already seen is if we were to open prematurely and then have to reclose. And then what kind of damage would that do to our businesses, to our school systems, to just our way of life and our confidence? And I think that's what the governors are trying to avoid a situation where we've prematurely opened and then we have to make some adjustments. So that's why I think it has to be very careful. That's why I think the use of testing is absolutely critical. And that's why I think that, the whole country can't expect to open, unilaterally, and that there may be areas around the country like West Virginia or maybe some of the Midwestern and Western states that aren't as heavily hit or are more dispersed populations, to try to see practicing social distancing in a more open environment, what kind of impacts that have. And I think that's what he's talking about, and I think that's smart. I mean, as anxious as we are to get going, I don't think anybody's anxious to get going if A, it's going to reoccur, or B, people are in more danger of getting sick. Well, I've been in contact with the governor's office, yes. And what we see is that here's where the breakdown was. Senator McConnell went to the floor on, I don't know, maybe last week and said, we're going to run out of money by this week, which we did because of the popularity of the program, the way it's working so well. And so he basically said, can we simply refill this bucket with another $250 billion, which is significant. Then two senators from Maryland objected, and I'm sure that was at the behest of Senator Schumer, and basically said, we need to have more money for hospitals, more money for states and local, more money for food stamps, and so wanted to reshape some of the programs that hadn't even pushed any money out. And so my stance is I think there's no reason we should be politicizing this if all we're doing is refilling a bucket. We're not changing any policy. We're not redoing any way that any shape or form. And I think the sole proprietors and the small businesses are the ones that are getting shut out now because they might not have been ready a week ago. And the lenders are more familiar with the program, so it could run smoother for those folks. And so to me, it just sounds like an effort to drive some political agenda into the reform into this program when really we all voted for it. It's all bipartisan, and so I'm hoping that there's negotiations going on. We know the hospitals are probably going to need more money, but at this point we put $100 million into the hospitals. There's still billion. There's still $70 billion remaining. Let's see where our gaps are with the hospital before we start saying the money's going to go here and there in that different hospital settings. That makes sense to me. That's where we are. I mean, I think that you've seen in the president's public statements and in his press conferences that he's very anxious to get the economy going. But I think in the substance of the call that we had with him yesterday, and it sounds like the same kind of substance of the call that he's gotten with business leaders and with his health leaders, is you can't do this too soon, and you can't do it full out like you want to. And so I think he's asking for advice. That's why he's created these councils. He's asking for creative ways to begin to reopen. And I think the staging that he put in with the phases, as you look through them, shows a very cautious approach. But, I think it's just a function of who he is as a person, and probably as a business person, as president, wanting people to get back to work because he knows that's what people want. He's anxious to do that. But I think certainly us on his council and his other health advisors and the governors are going to say, we have to have assurances that we're moving in the right direction at the right time. And so that's where I think we are with that. So what I think is the biggest detriment to getting shut out is not having any money in there as we are right now. I mean, the doors are closed. So I would say that if you reopen the doors to the lenders to be able to begin lending again, I think you're going to see all these small businesses still going in and looking, and maybe the ones in the beginning probably were the ones that had lawyers and accountants. I get that. But now we see, I mean, I'm getting phone calls from hairdressers, from very, very small restaurant businesses, that have 2 and 3 people that are trying to get in and can't because the doors are closed because there's no funding. So in my view, the quickest way to do that is to put the money in and open it up. It's still open to everybody. It's not, there's no, except the only limiting factors are basically you have to have less than 500 employees. And so that, to me, I think is just, in my view, would be a roadblock to even more time being spent developing how do you determine what's rural? How do you determine who's smaller than a small? And so you got to rewrite all these things. I mean, let's keep it where it is and just put more money in it. That makes more sense to me. I think that's what the Secretary of the Treasury believes could carry it forward, the President and the experts who are looking at the program in depth to see because I think there's been a slowdown in applications. There was, and with that became a slowdown in the amounts that are being asked for. So I do believe that 250 is enough, and if it's not, then we should look at refilling it again because it's successful. It's keeping people off the unemployment rolls. And look how many people are on those, and keeping them tied to their employer. I really think the demand became more than what was really expected. And I don't think we knew when we created the program, even 3.5 short weeks ago, I don't think that we knew the depth of the economic desperation that we would see with people being laid off and all these businesses being shuttered. If you remember, that came really rather quickly. And so I think it was just the demand was uncalculated and is much greater than what we thought. Well, I do think that, we're gonna do a look back and see what was effective and what wasn't. I think we should. And that's one of the reasons I think before we give more money to the states, we need to make sure, the states now are saying, but we have lost tax revenues that we really need to, this is where has been our greatest harm. And the program's structured that the tax revenues cannot be part of the recoupable dollars. So, those are the kinds of things that you learn as you go along on where you might need to make some adjustments. Where I think, I've heard from, for instance, landlords, people who say if you're in Morgantown or in Huntington or anywhere else that has, a bunch of college students, they've lost a lot of their revenues. And nobody's coming in to look to re-rent or to look or anything because we're, social distancing, and that's not something that people begin to think about. So, these are the kinds of things that you learn, that we're learning as we go along, that I think will be helpful because we're going to do another package here, and we want to make sure that we drop what's not necessary or hasn't been effective, and that we recreate people who might have slipped through the cracks. Well, I am really concerned about when we hit the bottom and how we hit the bottom. And I think a lot of that is predicated on the spread of the virus and the confidence of the antibody testing and others that we know that we've stopped the spread. I mean, I've said all along, the one way to get our economy back going is to stop the spread of the virus, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think we've had some success. And certainly in West Virginia, it's been, I don't want to say all successful because we've lost people, but in our nursing homes, I'm very concerned about that situation. But so I don't know that I could quantify that we're going to go into a depression, but I do share his concern that if we don't somehow start jump-starting the areas that have least potential for harm, that we try to reform some of our employment protocols. For instance, if you're going into a manufacturing plant where you might be in a more crowded area, that you are tested before you go, so you have the confidence you can't spread. Those kinds of things. I think we're all anxious to get around to and begin to see some light at the end of this tunnel. I do believe that's something that we all want very, very much.